Welcome to the Explainer. So, how does a company of traders, really just looking for profit, end up building the entire legal system for a subcontinent? It sounds impossible, right? Well, today we're tracing that incredible and often accidental 190-year journey.
Okay, let's jump right in. To really get how this all happened, we're going to follow this timeline. We start in 1600 with a trading company. Then, boom, 1757, the Battle of Plassey turns them into rulers. Then comes a massive crisis in 1857, the Great Rebellion, and it all wraps up in 1947 with independence. Now, these aren't just dates. They're huge turning points that changed everything.
So, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the tiny private courts of a trading company, see what happens when they suddenly have to govern a huge territory, watch the whole thing collapse and get taken over by the British Crown, and then follow the creation of the legal codes that became the blueprint for today.
You know, at the very beginning, the East India Company wasn't here to rule. Not at all. They were here for business, pure and simple. But, well, business leads to disagreements, and disagreements need to be settled. And that's where this whole story really kicks off.
So the first step was actually a tiny one. This charter, in 1686, set up a mayor's court. Now, this wasn't for everybody. It was just an internal HR thing, really. A court inside their own factories, for their own people, to handle their own problems. A simple solution that planted a very important seed.
Well, things didn't stay small for long. Just a few decades later, this new charter comes along, and it sets up two totally separate tracks for justice. One for civil stuff, money and property disputes, and another for criminal acts. This basic idea, splitting civil and criminal law, is a huge deal. It's a blueprint that's going to stick around for the next 200 years. All right, now let's jump to a moment that completely changed the game. This is the year the East India Company goes from being a business that rents a few buildings to being the actual ruler. And this changed everything.
The Battle of Plassey.
After this, the company isn't just a tenant anymore. They're the landlord. They're in charge of huge areas of land. And being the landlord created this massive new problem that their little company courts were just not equipped to handle.
I mean, that's the question, right? How do you go from settling disputes between a few merchants to providing justice for millions of people? Your tiny little internal courts are, useless for a task that big. They were completely out of their depth.
The answer had to come from London. The British government itself stepped in with this, the Regulating Act of 1773. And this marks a huge shift from private company rules to actual state law. It just got rid of the old mayor's courts and set up powerful, brand new Supreme Courts. The government was officially in the game now.
But this new setup, this kind of hybrid system that was part company, part state, it was super unstable. It was clunky, complicated, and frankly, it was built on a really shaky foundation. And it was about to face an earthquake that would bring the whole thing crashing down.
Yeah, this whole ad hoc legal system, this patchwork of courts and rules that they'd stitched together over a century, it was about to get torn to shreds.
1857. It's known by a lot of names: the Sepoy Mutiny, the Great Rebellion. But no matter what you call it, this event was a massive, violent explosion that proved one thing beyond any doubt. The East India Company had failed as a government. Things had to change, and fast.
And this was it, the end of the road for the company. The British government solution was dramatic. Just get rid of the East India Company altogether. Dissolve it. The era of the British Raj begins and the Crown takes direct control. The unintentional architect of this legal system was officially fired, and a new, much more deliberate imperial architect took its place.
So, with the Crown running the show, the whole approach changes. No more just reacting to problems. Now, it's about building. It's about systematically creating one unified legal framework for all of British India.
And wow, did they ever move fast? Just look at this list. It was like a legislative blitz. In just about 20 years, they wrote down and standardized the core pillars of the law: criminal, civil, evidence, contracts, the whole shebang. And many of these codes are still incredibly influential today.
Okay, so now you've got the laws written down, you've got the rule book. What's next? Well, you need the actual buildings, the courtrooms, the judges. You need to build the structure to apply those laws, and you need to do it everywhere, consistently.
This act was a huge deal. It pretty much wiped away all the old local Mughal-era courts that were still around. In their place, it set up this clear, four-tiered ladder for all civil cases. Now, every single district had the exact same structure. And you guessed it, about a decade later, they did the exact same thing on the criminal side. The Code of Criminal Procedure created this parallel structure for all criminal cases. See how it's all clicking into place? That two-pillar system we saw a tiny glimpse of way back in 1726, it's now fully built out, solid as a rock.
This was the capstone, the final piece on top of the whole pyramid. The federal court in Delhi connected all the different provincial high courts into a single national system. For the very first time, there was a highest court in India. The buck stopped there. Well, almost. The Privy Council in London was still the ultimate court of appeal.
Then comes 1947. 190 years of British rule officially ends. The flags change, new countries are born, but here's the crazy thing. The legal architecture, the whole system that had been built piece by painstaking piece, most of it stayed right where it was.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that this massive legal framework wasn't really designed from the top down in some grand plan. It was built out of necessity. It was a reaction to problems, first a trade dispute, then the problem of governing, and finally a full-blown rebellion. It was built one piece at a time.
And that's the lasting legacy, isn't it? That's the question that hangs over this whole story. How does this blueprint, forged over 190 years by a colonial power for its own purposes, continue to shape the laws and the daily lives of over 1 billion people in South Asia today? It's a powerful thing to think about. Thanks for joining this explainer.